America's midterm elections on November 8th have delivered good news for the Democrats so far. Republicans were on the brink of taking control of the U.S. House of Representatives after a flurry of races were called for them on Monday. The party had expected an overwhelming victory in the lower chamber of Congress due to high inflation and dissatisfaction with the Biden administration. But there was unexpectedly strong support for the Democrats, who have controlled the House since 2019. Even if the Republicans do claim victory in the House, it is likely they will have the narrowest margin of the 21st century, rivaling 2001 when they had a 9-seat majority. Joining us on this show this morning as we discuss the U.S. midterm election is Professor Bolaji Akinyemi, Nigeria's former Minister of Foreign Affairs. Welcome to the morning show, Prof. Thank you for joining us. Good morning.
Good morning, Dr. Abati. Good morning, Mr. Hussaini.
Good to see you again, sir. Morning, sir.
Well, quickly, two things, Prof.
Thank you.
Your take on the U.S. midterm elections, the implications of the underwhelming performance of the GOP and the red wave, the Republican red wave that was predicted did not happen. Instead, Joe Biden has put up the best midterm performance, that's his administration, since he was not on the ballot in 40 years. And secondly, Donald Trump, was named as a major factor for the poor performance of the Republicans. And yet the same Donald Trump says he wants to run again. New York Times wrote an editorial this morning saying that this certainly must be a joke, that a man who does not believe in the rule of law cannot say he wants to be president again in 2024. But what do you think? Those two issues.
Thank you very much. I must congratulate you for your patience before talking about this issue. This is an example of what one gains by not rushing to judgment. Because at the beginning, when the results started coming in, everyone, including myself, was still expecting that Republican wave because of the factors that you have mentioned, especially the rate of inflation, the uncertain economy, and let's not beat about the bush, the underperformance of Mr. Biden himself. And yet, now we see what has happened. My take is going to be rather mixed and at times contradictory. Number one, I don't see this as a victory for Mr. Biden. I think he was a lucky man in the right place, in the sense that the Roe versus Wade decision by the Supreme Court obviously played a more important factor than the Republicans thought it would play. Now, I am in favor of Roe versus Wade, but I am not in favor of what I will call the reckless radicalism of the Supreme Court before this present set of justices came in. And what do I mean by that? As I have said, I'm in favor of Roe versus Wade, but I am not in favor of man and man marriage, woman and woman marriage. And yet the Supreme Court had declared that under the Constitution, that was a marriage. I don't buy into that. And I think the Supreme Court made the wrong decision in picking on Roe versus Wade. If they had picked on this man-man marriage or woman-woman marriage, I suspect that the Democrats might not have scored the victory that they scored. Part of why I feel strongly about this man-woman marriage or woman-woman marriage is the fact that the Americans even tried to force it down our throat in Nigeria. I know how I was lobbied by the United States and Britain when Jonathan was in power. Dr. Abate will recall that the Secretary General of the Commonwealth came visiting when you had that legislation before our National Assembly. And he consulted me about how he should handle the situation in his meeting with President Jonathan. And I advised him that that was a no-go area for us. We don't like being told what the definition of marriage in Nigeria, and that it will simply hit up, the system. In any case, Roe versus Wade played into the hands of the Democrats. That's one. Number two, the way Trump and the Republicans' denial syndrome went about still crying over the spilled milk of 2020 elections, I think also turned a lot of Americans off the Republicans, that these were simply people who didn't believe in the rule of law. And I think that the congressional hearings over January 6th insurrection resonated with the Americans more than the Republicans thought that it would. And I believe that these American elections is a clear demonstration that man is made for more than just bread and butter, that there are other values that we can stress and we can emphasize. You've brought up the issue of Trump for the next election. I don't know whether we should be too hard now on our in-law, since he's just married a Lebanese Nigerian who speaks Yoruba fluently, and shamelessly, a lot of Nigerians turned up at the wedding festivities. When you are in government and you think you are fighting for our people, and your people show some behavioral pattern that makes you feel ashamed, to think that a lot of Nigerians, some of the people that I used to have a lot of respect for, would turn up at that wedding and be grinning ear to ear for photographs, and be happy to share the photographs on the social media. I mean, Trump is a pariah in the world, and yet that is the man a lot of your people of timber and caliber were not ashamed to be found in his company. It leaves me with a bitter taste in my mouth. Anyway, having said that,
Okay.
Trump is a man who believes in himself. It doesn't matter that the Americans have rejected the people that he sponsored, that he embraced. Most decent men will take that as a rejection of themselves, but not Trump. He still believes, and probably he does, that the Republican base still supports him. And while we are blaming Trump, let us not also forget to blame the base of the Republican Party, because these Republican candidates went through the primaries, and the base of the Republicans endorsed them, embraced them before Trump then stepped into the show. That base is still there for Trump. I don't know what it is going to take before this base, wakes up to the fact that, they're on the road to destruction of the Republican Party. Maybe on the ashes of this election will arise a new Republican Party. It's a tragedy, I think, for Congress that the Republicans are likely, I think we can call it now, are likely to win the House of Representatives. The present leadership of the Republican Party in the House of Rep are Trumpists. They are not moderates, they are Trumpists who are even threatening that they are going to impeach President Biden, even though they know that the Senate will throw out the impeachment. They just want to embarrass him. It's like it's payback time. Whether there will be voices who will speak to them about, look at the way the Americans have rejected you, so don't go down that path of radicalism that will lead to nowhere. I don't know. But unfortunately, I think whatever may be the agenda of President Biden is dead now on arrival. Because even if it's only one vote in the House of Rep, unless maybe there could be one or two who would think of the Republic rather than their discredited party, who could be swung to vote for Biden, is a lame duck president for the next 2 years.
Oh, okay.
But in the judicial sector, don't forget that in the 4 years that Trump was in power, he packed the judiciary with right-wing judges. Now, Biden has 2 more years because of their control of the Senate to redress that by putting liberal-minded judges into the federal high court system.
Okay. Thank you so much for that in-depth analysis. You were able to, touch all the points. Pretty much the election was an abortion election, and a lot of votes came out. But also, there was a new phenomenon in this election. Normally, the independents will always vote the party in opposition for midterms. But the independents this time voted the party in power, which is a phenomenon that's never been seen before in American midterms. The independents pretty much decided these elections. What's your take on that phenomenon, sir?
I think that the independents were swayed by, one, the argument of the Democrats that democracy was at stake, that the opponents were people who didn't believe in the rule of law, who didn't believe in free and fair elections unless they won. Look at the statement by the lady, Carey, I believe, in Arizona, who finally lost, who said, I will not accept this, the result of these elections if I lose. The language of Trump. And there were several Republican candidates who went around mouthing that mantra. I think the independents felt the Republic was at stake. And the Democrats kept hammering on democracy is at stake. Also, look at the way, I noticed it, and I suspect that a lot of Americans also noticed it, how many former Democratic presidents came out. Obama, Clinton, and there was a message from Carter that if not for his age and his health, he would have been out on the stumps for the Democratic candidates. Where are the former Republican presidents to come out? Only Trump came out. And I mean, if you were an independent man, you wouldn't want to be found voting for Trump, because I also believe that this election was also a referendum on Trump. So that explains why you had that independent core of voters, voting for the Democrats. Also the youth. I failed to mention that factor in my earlier response to your questions. The youth, I believe the pollsters now say, I don't want to quote the wrong percentage, but it was pretty high. Normally the youth, especially in midterm elections, the youths are turned off. They go to the beach. They are busy, it doesn't really matter to them. But this time it mattered. The youth turned out. The black turned out, especially black women. Then you also had urban women who normally are conservatives because they are comfortable in their homes, in urban centers, They came out, and they came out to vote against the Republicans. So I believe that that base was energized by the kind of campaign that the Democrats ran.
Well, Prof, let's talk about Nancy Pelosi. President Biden is telling Nancy Pelosi to stick around. Donald Trump says, Nancy Pelosi, you are fired. The expectation is that by Tuesday, the Republicans will take that seat. But President Biden asking her to stick around and still make a bid for the leadership. She's 82. Her husband, Paul Pelosi, was attacked the other day, and she said that will affect her decision, even if she decides to make a bid. Do the Democrats have the numbers?
Well, do the Democrats have the numbers? I mean, this may just be an academic exercise. But for the sake of a discussion, let us even believe that by a miracle, God knows we need miracles in Nigeria here. If by miracle, the Democrats get hold of the House of Rep, I will not want Nancy Pelosi back as Speaker. I think she was an unguided missile in the area of foreign policy in the last 1 year. Her visit to Taiwan almost triggered off a confrontation between the United States and China. There is no need to tweak China's nose. China is not a global south country that you could be rude to. I wonder whether there are people who understand China's culture and the effect of that culture on their behavior in the Democratic Party administration. For example, I'm not sure you noticed, but I did. Biden kept Xi waiting for their first meeting. Look, these things are choreographed, that both presidents are supposed to step on the stage at the same pace and meet in front of the flags at the same time. She got there. He was waiting before Biden then came strolling in. You see, the Americans can be so childish in the pursuit of their foreign policy. They are so used to this, their magnus economic and military power, that they don't seem to recognize that actually the gap between them and China now is paper thin. that picture is not going to go down well in China. I can assure you. The Americans may be clapping that their man came out to no tops. But is that kind of behavior? Anyway, your question was on Nancy Pelosi. I really think she's had her innings. She's played, good sixes and fours, if I can use cricket term. I think it's time for her to retire gracefully and let a younger. You can't have a 70-something-year-old president, a 70-something-year-old speaker. I mean, Democrats running America. Not at this time. Not at this time. The global affairs is in a state of panic. Look at the missile that just fell on Poland. You need steady hands. I said this 2 years ago on this program that I am not impressed by the people who President Biden had called into his strategic and foreign policy circle. So to now have another one in the House of Rep, I think the world will be taking a chance.
Okay, from the oldest, let's come to the youngest. Two things happened in this midterm elections. Max, a 25-year-old Frosty Gen Z, became one of the youngest people to be elected into the Congress. Does that mean that there's a tilt towards Generation Z people? Because if you also remember a couple of years ago, I think it was just close to our 30s or in our 30s when Ocasio-Cortez got elected in a very powerful district in New York. Also, there was another slant in Penn, Pennsylvania, for the first time. Ms. Summer became a congresswoman. The fact that a black person in Pennsylvania could hold a Congress district, is this the beginning of a new day in America?
Well, be kind to Pennsylvania. I lived there for 2.5 years, and it wasn't a bad state. I lived in Philadelphia. Don't talk about Pennsylvania as if it's Alabama or Mississippi. But I get your point. Generation Z is increasing its strength in Congress. I think they are still, number one, too small in number, and also too, what was the word now? They are still too young. Don't forget, Congress also runs on gerontocracy. The older you are, the longer you've been there, the more you've risen into the leadership position, and the more the substantive committees, assignments that you will be given. But the more of them we get from election to election, I think that the younger influence that we will get. But see, don't forget, the United States system has this way of throwing up surprises. From, if you recall, from old General Eisenhower to young JFK, from young JFK to old Lyndon Johnson, and then from Lyndon Johnson to, well, I don't know whether old or young, but discredited Nixon, and then to young Clinton, then from young Clinton to anyway, young, and then to Obama, and then from Obama to discredited Trump, old Trump, and then from old Trump to old, what do you call him? Old, the President Biden, and who knows, we may end up with young Kamala Harris. So it swings, at least at the executive level, but congressional level, oh, the old people do hang on forever.
Two things, and we might as well seize this opportunity to discuss them. First, the 3.5-hour meeting between Xi Jinping and President Biden. Now, at the end of that meeting, the Chinese said Taiwan represents a red line that the Americans must not cross. However, both parties agreed to keep communication channels open. There are also plans for Antony Blinken to visit China, but you seem to be very skeptical that anything, momentous will come out of that meeting. And then secondly, you talked about Poland. Now, well, the Russians have denied responsibility. The Polish, they say the missile was Russian-made, and are we likely to witness an escalation? Is there likely to be, action in the direction of either Article 4 or Article 5 of the NATO treaty? And if it goes one way or the other, what kind of risk do we run as a global community?
Will you mind if I answer the second question first?
Yes, sir. Please go ahead.
Because of the consequences for the global community. We've discussed on this program the Russian-Ukrainian war, and I was always warning of the danger of an accident, that I don't believe that either Russia or the United States would deliberately precipitate a momentous crisis that may gradually slide into a third world war. But an accident, an unintended action. And is this kind of missiles into Poland that one had in mind? Russia has denied it. I will expect that. I will expect them to deny it. The United States has been rather cautious. Biden said from the briefing he's got, he doesn't believe it was a deliberate action. Now views are tending towards that, yes, it was a Russian missile, but not fired by the Russians, that the Ukrainians have a lot of Russian missiles they inherited, and that some of these had been fired to stop incoming Russian missiles, and maybe one or two had gone astray. Whatever it is, this is the kind of danger that one had been warning about. Also, please don't forget that I believe within Russian military establishment there is increasing anti-Putin personnel who could deliberately again perpetrate an act to embarrass Putin and also to provoke the United States into taking actions that will put an end to what they regard as madness on the part of Putin that increasingly is isolating Russia from part of the world. So we are at a stage now where there are dangerous moves. And what I would suggest is that even if Article 4 and 5 of the NATO treaty were to be activated, I hope the result of it will not be a full-scale missile launch by the United States into Russia. Instead, I will hope that that NATO will now expand what I will call anti-missile defense aerial system to cover all the parts of Ukraine that border on frontiers with NATO, to make them no-go areas for Russian missiles so that none will go astray again. So let it be a defense reaction rather than an outscale, a full-scale missile response into Russian territory. That is what I would suggest. But I am happy. You know, we've discussed this on this back channels that exist. I understand that the chief of CIA, the director of the CIA, was meeting his Russian counterpart in Turkey only last week. I hope that there are more of these back channels, and hopefully this will be the first step towards bringing an end to this Ukrainian war. Ukraine is being destroyed. Absolutely no doubt about it. The General Assembly of the United Nations has passed the resolution, but a thin majority, I think it was 94 in favor, 4 against, and 75 abstentions. So it wasn't a full-scale United Nations General Assembly majority, but there was a majority that held Russia accountable for the destruction that's taking place in Ukraine and holds Russia accountable for the reconstruction that will take place. It has no binding effect, and Russia has said it's just going to ignore it. But there's that probative value that the United Nations has said Russia will be held accountable. But there is need for talks to start taking place, you know, behind the scenes, out of the glare of the press, towards bringing this war to an end. Now to your first question, I think it was a good meeting between the United States and China. And the fact that there is that opening that the Secretary of State of the United States will visit Peking. I hope the United States Secretary of State will behave like an adult on this occasion, because recall that the very first meeting between the United States and China after Biden got into power, the U.S. Secretary of State was reading a whole litany of human rights violations by China, and China then gave it back to them about the way, about violations of human rights by the United States. You know, what often bothers me, and it still surprises me, even after all these years of being involved in this system, is what I will call the hypocrisy of the United States. Recall again, about 3 weeks ago, the United Nations passed, the same General Assembly, passed a resolution condemning the United States for continuing the blockade and the embargo on Cuba. Only one country, no, I think 2 countries, voted against that resolution. United States, and I don't remember the second country. But even Ukraine didn't vote along with the United States. For the past 20 years, that resolution has been passed every year. And the United States have simply ignored it. And then you turn around and you start accusing other countries of breaches of human rights. Well, I hope that the United States Secretary of State is not going to go to Peking and repeat that performance. There are areas of climate change, areas of limitations of strategic arms talks that they could talk about. They could talk about possible ways in which China could help to moderate the activities of North Korea. So many areas that they could talk about, and it will be of comparative advantage to both countries than to start, emphasizing areas where as you rightly said, there would be red lines. So, but nevertheless, it was a good beginning that the 2 of them, for the first time, met, talked, and there were positive areas and windows of opportunities have been left open. But Taiwan is a red line. Believe me, Taiwan is a red line. And when Biden said that the United States still believes in the one China policy, that's a coded message that they recognize that Taiwan belongs to China. But I don't know what it's going to take for the United States to finally say China can do what it likes in Taiwan. But what I pray will not happen is that America will not sacrifice young American lives defending the indefensible.
Well, Professor Bolaji Akinyemi, we would like to thank you very much for your insight.